Hi everyone. We'll get started in about a minute or so. Hello. We're going to get started in a minute here. Welcome. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. Okay. Let's get started, shall we? Let me just get everything set up here. Okay. Hello, welcome. Welcome to another edition of Talmud Tales, the 20th. Crazy that we've been doing this new way of learning and living for actually 21 weeks because we did miss a week of Talmud Tales. I don't even remember what for at this point, but there was a week that we took off. So technically 21 weeks since the start of this Sefer at home. So it's been a while. Interesting adjustments. Okay, so the last couple weeks we were talking about God's prayer and God's anger. And we're starting to delve into kind of this blending of Agadah and Halacha, this idea of Talmud as a representation of stories and Talmud teaching lessons through law. I feel like the last two passages were starting to blend those together. But this week I went back to a more pure story. And I think the reason I was thinking about this story was, number one, just thinking about fate and what role do we play in the fate of our own lives and in the fate of the world. And then also this idea of Shabbat and relaxation, and what is the power of Shabbat. And so those are the two things on my mind that drew me to this story. And of course, there are a lot of different themes, and I'll be curious to see what you take from the story. So we'll delve into that in a minute. So again, Zoom protocol in this format, this webinar format, you have at the bottom of your screen the opportunity after I go through and read the story and we have the chance to listen to some of my thoughts on it. Then we're going to turn it over to you and for you to share your interpretations and thoughts. So at that time, you can either put your questions into the Q&A, or you can put them into the chat, or you can virtually raise your hand and then I can call on you and unmute you and then you can share your thoughts. Okay? So that's how we will do this. And of course, we begin with the prayer for engaging in the study of Torah. So please feel free to join with me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Okay, let's do this. This is called, I called this the Shabbat Pearl. So as it's a short story, I want you to think about what's happening here with the lesson of fate, reward and punishment per se. There are a couple of things that I would love your help in trying to understand if there are symbolic representations of something else. So we'll get to that. And what do you think about what type of a reward is being suggested at the end of the passage? So those are the things for you to keep in mind, of course, with whatever else you want to think about as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and read through the story, and then we will discuss it. This is from Shabbat. So the whole section in the Talmud that deals with Shabbat and what's happening during Shabbat and all the rules of Shabbat. Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, that's his name according to the story. Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, had in his neighborhood a certain Gentile who owned a lot of property. Soothsayers told him, all the property you have, Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, will eventually enjoy. So the Gentile went and sold his property. With the proceeds, he bought a pearl, which he secured in his headdress. When he was crossing a bridge, the wind blew off the headdress. It carried it out to sea, and a fish swallowed it. The fish was caught and brought to the marketplace on the eve of the Sabbath at twilight. They asked, "Who will buy a fish at this late hour?" They were told, "Go, take it to Joseph who honors the Sabbath. He is always eager to buy fine food in the Sabbath's honor." So the fish was brought to him, and he bought it. When he cut it open, he found the pearl in it. He sold it for enough gold dinars to fill 13 upper chambers. A certain venerable elder met him and said, "He who lends to the Sabbath will repay him." Okay? That's the whole story. Very short and sweet and potentially to the point. Okay? So let's go back through it one more time. And then, again, I want your thoughts. There's, of course, also the theme of Gentile and Jew. I don't think, unlike some stories in the Talmud where that tends to be the major focus of the narrative and what the lesson is somehow connected to Jew versus non-Jew. I don't know. Maybe you have your own thoughts about whether or not how significant it is that this is a non-Jew or not. We can read into that all kinds of things. But there is this idea that throughout the Talmud and throughout our tradition, there are certain things that we have to do in order to bring peace with our non-Jewish neighbors. And there are other times where we need to separate ourselves from our non-Jewish neighbors. A lot about Judaism is about separating us from others, not in a way that's necessarily negative or disrespectful to those who are not Jewish, but really a lot of what we understand Judaism to be is about separation of all kinds of things. Think about Havdalah, which marks the separation of Shabbat from the rest of the week. If you think about kosher wine, and if you do some research on kosher wine and what makes wine kosher, the idea that it's about separating Jews from non-Jews. So there are a lot of things where for us as modern Jews can feel very uncomfortable. And at the same time, I think it does lend itself to some of the themes that we deal with today, not just between Jews and non-Jews, but between us, however you want to define us, and the other. That dynamic exists in so many different ways in our world today. So I do think that lens is relevant for this story. Okay, so let's go back through it, and then we'll open it up for your thoughts and your concerns or questions, whatever that may be. All right, so let's go back to the top. All right, so we have this man. His name is Joseph who honors the Sabbath. That is how he is referred to throughout the story in the Hebrew. So already built into this man's definition is the fact that he honors Shabbat. Okay, and there are a lot of things that come with what it means to honor Shabbat, but we can imagine that means that he takes Shabbat very seriously and the laws of Shabbat, as well as the observance of Shabbat. So already we're getting a sense that this is a ritual-oriented person. Someone whose identity itself is built and connected to this ritual of Shabbat. All right, so think about if we wanted to try and figure out a modern way of seeing this is, are there certain people whose identities are so caught up in how they act or how they prioritize their lives or what matters to them the most? Do we define people that way? Are there people that we know of? Are there people within our society or groups of people who are defined positively or negatively with a certain ritual, a certain way in which they go about the world, in which they see the world? Okay, so Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, had in his neighborhood a certain Gentile who owned a lot of property. So a non-Jew who owned a lot of property. Soothsayers. Now we've had references to soothsayers, astronomers in past stories. The idea that there was this group of people who had the power to be able to dictate the future, or at least to tell us about what our future was, and to let us know what our fate would be in the future. So soothsayers told this non-Jew, all the property you have, Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, will eventually enjoy. Okay, so what is going to happen here? This Gentile has just found out that everything he owns, he's a very rich man, everything he owns is going to be given to this Jewish man, Joseph, who honors the Sabbath. So how is he going to respond? So the Gentile responds by going and selling his property. The assumption that I take from this is that what he's trying to do is he's trying to negate the fate that has been given to him by these soothsayers. Somehow he is trying to control fate by trying to make it impossible for Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, to get his property. Whether that's because he's anti-Semitic, whether that's because he loves his wealth and wants to hold on to it himself, and he's selfish. What other interpretations do you have about what his reasoning is? We don't actually know the motivation behind why he does this, but we can assume he is trying to make it harder for Joseph to get his property. And so with the proceeds, he bought a pearl. So he gets rid of all the property because, according to the soothsayers, it was the property that Joseph was going to enjoy. So now we would assume he's now had this one tiny pearl which he has more control over. Again, I think this is about control. The Gentile here, the non-Jew, though I don't know if it really matters if he's a non-Jew or not. This is a person who is trying to control as much as possible, right? So he is consolidating his wealth into something that he literally can hold on to in his hand. And think about all the times where we wish we had the power to control as much as possible, and how powerful it would feel to be able to hold all of your wealth in your hand, and at the same time very scary. With the proceeds, he bought this pearl, which he secured in his headdress. So he puts it in his headdress so that no one can see it. So again, it's about control, but it's also about hiding this piece so that he can keep it purely to himself. This is about someone who's only looking out for his own needs. And when he was crossing a bridge, the wind blew off the headdress, and it carried it out to sea, and a fish swallowed it. So there are three things that happen here, and I would love your help in trying to understand, is there symbolism between these three things that happen? First, the wind comes. The wind plays a role. Secondly, the water, because it's carried out to sea in the water. And then finally, the fish. Wind, water, fish. Is there significance in those three things? If we were to assume that there is symbolism, which I am prone to do with stories like this, what are we supposed to learn from these three things that are happening as this man is trying to control his wealth, but in fact the world has more control over his life than he does? And so the wind comes and blows off the headdress, which then floats into the water, through the water, and then finally a fish swallows it. So the fish was caught and brought to the marketplace on the eve of the Sabbath at twilight. Shabbat is about to start. And if you've recalled from previous stories, there are a lot of things that happen at this liminal moment, this cusp of time, right? This time that is not purely one thing and it's not purely another thing. It's the time in between, right? And that if you think about in our lives, how much happens in those in-between moments where we're not feeling totally in one place or another, but in that liminal place. I think the best example that I was taught of what a liminal place would be an airport. An airport is a place that you don't settle down in, you don't live there. It's a place that you pass through in order to get from one place to another. So here we are in this liminal place between the week and Shabbat, and Shabbat is about to start. And so they ask, who's going to buy a fish at this late hour? Everyone's already getting ready for Shabbat. They're already in their homes. They're cooking dinner already. It's pretty late in the game to try and sell a fish in the market when Shabbat is about to hit. So they were told, go, take it to Joseph, who honors the Sabbath. He's always eager to buy fine food in the Sabbath's honor. So even at this late hour, there is a man that everyone knows about who, if he has the opportunity to honor Shabbat with fine food, we assume this is a delicious looking fish and it's beautiful. If anyone's going to do it, it's going to be Joseph. So I think what we have here is not only did we learn through Joseph's name that he was someone committed to Shabbat, but now he's someone who has a certain reputation in the community. That his name is not just the only thing that defines who he is, it's through his actions. And it's the fact that this is a man who has a reputation for loving Shabbat, for honoring Shabbat, and therefore, even at the late hour, when no one else may be willing to buy this fish, well, at least there is Joseph, and because we know his reputation and his love for Shabbat, then he is definitely going to be someone who would be interested in this fish. So they brought him the fish, and he bought it, which would be typical of him on leading into Shabbat, because anything he can do to honor his values and honor what matters to him more than anything else, which is Shabbat and honoring that Shabbat, he's going to do. So he does it. And when he cuts it open, he finds the pearl in it. He sold it for enough gold dinars to fill 13 upper chambers. In other words, he was able to sell for so much money that he had enough money to last for the rest of his life. Even though, really, it doesn't seem like that was what mattered to him. He was just going about his life, and then this fish fell into his lap, right? But did it really just fall into his lap? Or was it there because fate dictated it? Or is it a reward for some other way in which he's living his life? A certain venerable elder met him and said, "He who lends to the Sabbath will repay him." And that's the end of the story. And that last line is supposed to be the message here, that he who lends on the Sabbath will repay him. You can look at that a few ways. First, to lend on those who give to the Shabbat is going to reward them. That on one level, this could be suggesting that there are monetary rewards for upholding the laws of Shabbat, or you could maybe extend that to upholding the laws of our tradition, which is in line with what we're talking about in the Torah right now. If you think about the connection between this idea of upholding mitzvot and the laws given to us from God, we're at the end of our journey, where it's the book of Deuteronomy. We're standing there on the edge of the promised land, and Moses is giving a variety of speeches all about, if you follow the rules that God has given you, good things are going to happen. And if you don't, bad things are going to happen to you. It's actually part of, in last week and then some continuation this week, this idea that actually is found in the second paragraph of the Ve'ahavta that the Reform movement has taken out of its liturgy. The second paragraph of Ve'ahavta does talk about this concept of reward and punishment, but Reform and liberal Jews were very uncomfortable with that, so they took it out of the Siddur. So you don't really find that in the Siddur, and it's definitely not recited out loud at Reform synagogues. So you do have, based on this final statement of this story, this idea of reward and punishment potentially on a monetary level, but definitely on a deeper level, this idea of spiritual reward. If we are committed to something, you can either narrowly define it as Shabbat itself, or you can broaden that to Jewish living. You could broaden that to a certain value system. That when you uphold that, when your identity is so connected to what matters to you and what matters to you in a positive way, then you will receive rewards for that. Now, you can agree or disagree with that, but this seems to be suggesting that even if you're not looking for it, Joseph, who honors the Sabbath, was not looking for this reward. He was going about his life based on what mattered to him, his passions, his values. And as a result of him going down that path, he was ultimately rewarded. And so I think this is a good story because it does bring up one of the questions that I think we ask ourselves, or at least I've asked myself: what does reward and punishment look like on a spiritual level? And do I need to be actively engaging in certain things in the hopes of receiving a reward, not monetary reward, but a spiritual and fulfilling reward? Or is it better to not even think about reward and punishment and just do what matters and do what's right? And if you can maintain a good value system and you can look at the world as though you are honoring the Sabbath. And what would it mean if all of us were to be Joseph, who honors the Sabbath? Maybe he's a caricature of something much broader. He's supposed to represent the fact that if all of us were to imagine what the Sabbath represents and we were to honor that, because the Sabbath, the Shabbat, is not just about a day of rest. It's not just about, hanging out and going on a walk, right? It is about shifting your entire perspective for one day of the week. And of course, if you haven't read The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, you have to read that. But there's so many beautiful elements to what Shabbat represents, and the more time you spend studying it or living out Shabbat, there is a frame of reference that you start to have on the world that I believe is incredibly powerful and moving and healthy for not only us as individuals, but healthy for us as a society. So maybe this is suggesting that if we could all understand the value of what Shabbat represents, that we could all sort of come to a reward that could be beneficial for the whole world. Just a few thoughts. I'm trying to think if there was anything else here that I wanted to. Yes. So Joseph, he isn't focused on whether or not he's going to get a reward, but it doesn't come to him without him taking some action. The action being that he bought that fish and then he cut up the fish and he found that pearl. If he had not done that, which of course probably would go against his nature, but sometimes we do feel the pressure either from ourselves or from others to not follow our value system. And we get tempted to fall off that train and not act in a way that we know we should act. And this story also seems to be suggesting that if you maintain your focus and your direction and you continue to act in a way that is in line with your name, and in our tradition, your name is more than literally how you're identified. Your name is your reputation, how you're thought of, and how you are remembered. Think about all the ways in which we think about Yisker and remembering people's names and why we read people's names every Shabbat and 4 times a year at Yisker services. That is because a name represents more than just who that person was in their lifetime. It's something that represents who they are for eternity. And the value of maintaining that memory and that definition for as long as possible. So here he takes this action, and that through your actions, if they are in line with your value system, have the ability to bring you reward. And I think I'll leave it at that. There were probably some other things, but I would love to hear your thoughts, and I know people already have their hands raised. Okay, so let's see what you have to say, and we will begin with Abby. Hi, Abby.
All right, so I see this as a parallel to the Joseph story and the story of creation.
Okay.
So the wind, the water, the fish. And also, but Joseph in itself, because Joseph was the one who had the coat of many colors, and he sort of liked a lot of riches. And then, he was sold off, the story. But I'm sort of focusing on the last 2 lines. And that is, he sold it for enough gold, so a lot of gold. And then somebody tells him, who lends the Shabbat will repay him. But the most important thing is, what are you going to be doing with that money? Are you just going to be keeping it like that elderly man that had it before? Or are you going to share it? And I think that is something that Joseph, I think, who was favored by the father, so sort of, had to learn through his journey. And I like the story. It took a while, because at first I'm thinking, why do they have to say a Jew and a Gentile? But really, it's about the Shabbat, and it's about, you can have all this money, but money can't buy you health, happiness, and all of that.
Great. Thank you, Abby. Yes. And also, as you pointed out, how are you going to use your wealth, right? And that if you can continue to pour in resources into a value system. I'm thinking about, we're coming into an election cycle less than 3 months away. And this is where the money, there was just a report that came out of Biden and Trump and how much money they've raised in the last month, and hundreds of millions, 150 versus 120. I don't remember exactly what the numbers were. But that to me is an example of people are spending money based on a value system that they want to see perpetuated into the future, or a value system they want to see changed. And that where we put our money and how we spend our money matters. And this story seems to be suggesting, don't just keep your money for yourself or try and hide it away. If you have money, put it towards the values that matter to you. Because for him, Joseph is a man who honors Shabbat. His life is based on the beauty of Shabbat. If he weren't going to put his more effort into making Shabbat more enjoyable and more beautiful, not only for himself, but for other people, he'd be missing out on what wealth really is about. So thank you, Abby. Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hello. One of the comments you made just a moment ago is about the value of your actions and what do they mean, not just currently, but we talk in Judaism about the merits of a predecessor, giving you the benefits and values that make up your life. That those actions that you take today are creating merit, which will be transmitted through your family and have been earned and never lost as far as your merit to God and merit in the afterlife and how they transmit within, let's even say, in the ability to learn from the merits of those predecessors that we have. And it's part of the training that we respect so much in Judaism and what makes Shabbat so unique in the ability to train Jews and to pass on Torah in a quiet setting of learning. So merit, learning, values, transition, since we are a people of history.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Appreciate it. Merle. Hi, Merle.
Hello. So I'm thinking that it didn't matter whether one man was Jewish and one wasn't, only because there are plenty of greedy Jewish people. And I'm thinking that the pearl, he didn't know the pearl was in the fish when he bought the fish. He was buying himself a good meal. The pearl was his reward for being a good person or for having his commitment to his Judaism in whatever way he did. And I don't think he thought about the cost of the reward. He just did what was right in his life, and this was his reward, was this pearl that happened to give him enough money. And, you know, when I talk about plenty of greedy Jewish we have some very wealthy friends who are very busy bragging about how much money they have, that we keep our distance from them. And when the camps burned down, she called me. I was out of town somewhere. I don't know. She called me to tell me I need to give money. I need to know how to give money. I have all this money. I'm going to give the camps this big check. And a couple of weeks later, when I got home and thanked her, I didn't know how much she had given, and nobody told me how much she gave. A couple of weeks later, when I saw her, she said, I hope $100 was enough. And all I said was, if that's what you chose to give, that's enough. I wasn't going to go into it about how much money I know she has, because she's a client of my husband's, and they talk about it all the time. But I feel like they don't get the message of their Judaism or the Shabbat message. And so I'm thinking that this man, he got this pearl and he sold it, and I'm thinking that somewhere down the line he's probably giving that money away to someone rather than being selfish.
Yes. Thank you, Merle. Yes, I think you're right. I think the assumption based on Joseph's actions up until this point in the story, we know who Joseph is by the end of this story. And I think that that's a really important lesson for all of us. Do people know who you really are? Who you are, what you stand for? Are you clear and do you articulate that? Do you live by that? I think one of the most basic ways to encapsulate the message of the story is just do the right thing and do what's true to you, and you will find rewards, however that may be. We may not even understand what those rewards are. They may not even come in our lifetime. But there are rewards for doing the right thing and for living by your value system and for people knowing who you are and knowing that what they see on the outside matches who you are on the inside. And in a time where social media has the capacity for people to create multiple identities, and not only to hide behind false identities online, but even to only show pieces of who they are, we have to be very careful that we don't translate that into the rest of our lives, that when we are interacting with people, when we build relationships with people, how can we make sure that they know who we are and what matters to us? How can our conversations with people guide people to a place to be able to walk away and say, I know who that person is. And because there's a comfort with that. Think about those people who you walk away and you're not really sure if you got a sense of who they are, right? There's an anxiety that comes with that. And we have so much anxiety that exists in the world right now. We don't need more of it. I think if we all can be true to who we are, which sometimes would lead to some intense debates between people because we do have different value systems. We do have things that are different priorities for us. But if we were to be able to have, as we've talked about in past conversations, a healthy debate and dialogue, that also is really important. So thank you for sharing that. Claudia. Hi, Claudia.
Hello. Every time I read Talmud, I'm always struck by, I mean, this might sound strange, but how economical it is in its use of words. I mean, I know it's a very long, book, but
right.
Really the words are there because they want them to be there in a certain way. So when I read a story, I always ask myself, why did they put it there? What did they want us, what did they want to convey to us? So when I first read this story, well, clearly they want us to stress the importance of observing Shabbat. But now that you've unpacked it for us, what I also see in it is an underlining of the values that distinguish the Jews. And maybe that's why they have the Gentile in the story as well. I'm not saying that values that, nowadays distinguish us, but we stress them, and they are generosity. And they are, yes, observing Shabbat. And yes, they are doing the right thing. And that by observing Shabbat, you are on path to leading a more just life, I suppose.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a great way of understanding how the Gentile fits into this, because this is about, you as Jews have certain priorities and responsibilities in the world that non-Jews are not responsible for. Non-Jews are not responsible for celebrating Shabbat or honoring Shabbat. We are not a people who suggest that the entire world needs to be doing things that we are doing. It's just that what we do, we need to do the best we can do. And that when we are to be a light unto the nations, it doesn't mean that we are supposed to be the only light, but we have a specific role, and we are a beacon in a certain way in which we understand the world and the values and how we are supposed to make this world a better place. So I think you're right. This is emphasizing for us that what Shabbat represents is more than just Shabbat, because Shabbat was a specific gift to the Jewish people that no one else, the Christians ended up taking a version of it for themselves also. And I don't blame them for that, because Shabbat's brilliant. It was a brilliant invention, but it was an invention for the Jewish people, and no one else is bound by that. So if we are going to have this ultimate gift of Shabbat and everything that it represents, and I really do urge you to think about what Shabbat can mean for you and your own observance, even if you're not going to be like a more Orthodox Jew and have that type of observance, there is such value in this invention that was given to us, this gift that was given to us thousands of years ago, that I do think this is suggesting, similar to when we had the story about Hillel standing on one foot. I think Shabbat is another one of those pieces. If we were to stand on one foot and think about what is the one ritual or holiday, because technically Shabbat is a holiday every single week, what is the one holiday or ritual that is the most powerful in our tradition? And I would say it's not Rosh Hashanah, it's not Yom Kippur, it's not Passover, it's Shabbat. And for so many reasons. So yes, thank you, Claudia. I think that's a really, really great point. Susan. Hi, Susan.
Here. Okay. One, I see as Shabbat is the pearl. You have it in your title, but the pearl of holding Shabbat. The second thing, I thought it was very interesting talking about liminal places. Crossing a bridge is a liminal as well. So I would add that for him, and then twilight for the sale of the fish. What it reminded me of when you said wind, ruach. There was often in the Bible a wind from the east blew, and things were. When Moses was on Mount Sinai, there was wind and culminations, but also in Breshit. I'm thinking of this primordial kind of references: wind, sea, and fish, which you pointed out. And the primordial is a sea, and I'm thinking of Jonah and the fish. I mean, that all these elements that come on in the story, and it shows on a more crass level, or not crass, everyday level, that the Gentile wanted to hoard, which you had brought up, hoard his property and condense it, but the moral too is a cautionary tale. Money comes and money goes, and it can be lost by forces outside of our control.
Great, thank you, Susan. Yeah, I love those connections that you made with the various lenses of Torah, right? And I'm thinking definitely about Jonah. I'm going to be teaching about Jonah on Yom Kippur afternoon, if anyone's interested. We are pre-recording our high holidays. Actually, we're doing it next week, which is a whole different weird thing. Not just on paper to be filming high holidays early, but also to try and spiritually put ourselves as clergy into that place of having to be leading high holidays literally with no one there, and also to do it early. But I still have my own work to do with understanding that before I can actually articulate something about that. But thank you. Yes, the Jonah, Ruach, this idea of wind, the primordial waters that existed before anything else was actually created in the story of Bereshit, in the story of creation, right? It's a great way of saying that what we're seeing here is that the story is also supposed to say that Shabbat is more, it's about an entire history, it's about an entire identity, that these references, that if you are a Jew, you may get them, right? That what's so wonderful about our tradition is that there's so many levels to what we experience, and even key words that not only tap into our own memories from our own lives. And for example, Judith Factor Salter was on Facebook, and she shared a little something about her own connection with money and her family's connection with money, and then how this brought up some of her own family history and the challenges that she faced with that. The brilliance of these stories and the brilliance of our tradition is that we're supposed to tap into the breadth of what the human experience is, that this is about how do you get repaid, not just through Shabbat or through a certain ritual, but the repayment, the way in which we are paid as Jews is through finding ways of connecting what we are experiencing right now to something much bigger. And that when we do that, we become enriched, because we see that, number one, we're not the only one who is going through X, Y, or Z. We are part of something much bigger, and no one wants to feel isolated and feel like they're the only ones experiencing something, but that we're also part of history, that we can be remembered, that we may not be forgotten, that the Jewish people, at least by being a part of the Jewish people will not be forgotten, haven't been forgotten. It was just last week on this Thursday that we were commemorating Tisha B'Av, all those destructive things that have occurred to the Jews over the course of history, and yet we are still here, right? So thank you, Susan, for all the things that you said. Allison makes a mention here about it's about fate too, and one who takes their wealth and displays it may blow away with the wind, but one who observes Sabbath receives the wealth, which is the pearl within the fish. The Sabbath is a deeper wealth, a spiritual wealth. Great, I love that. Milan said, the fact that the rich man is a Gentile and not a Shabbat-observing man makes a difference. Pharaoh wasn't a Jew, but he respected Joseph and made him the most powerful man in his kingdom. Had the rich man been a Shomer Shabbat Jew, meaning he kept Shabbat, he might have acted somewhat like Pharaoh and put him in charge of his property, knowing that he wouldn't act contrary to the highest principles. Oh, that's an interesting point too, Milan. Thank you. So I think you've all raised. I see that some people still have other comments. So go ahead, Jeff. Do you have another comment to make?
One of the thoughts that you've suggested and others have is that we are to be the light to the nations, which really translates for me into saying all of our principles, be it teshuvah, be it acts of loving kindness, can be considered universals, ideals that are applicable across all nations and all peoples. And even though it's been written and espoused under our auspices, so to speak, the principle of all these stories is to bring these greater values that are human values to light in how we share them and try to teach them, so to speak, to all people. That
yes.
These are not unique to us, but we are to make an attempt to spread that type of thinking, because these are like Homer and Plato's and Aristotle's ideals. They are what they are because they have existed and need to exist across all people.
Yes, great. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, one of the things that I've always struggled with is I think we need to be going out and bringing more Jews into our family, right? We don't proselytize. We allow people who want to convert to do so. There's the tradition of having to reject someone 3 times before we let them come in, so to speak. But there is such universal wisdom and such universal application for the values and lessons that we have in our tradition that I believe at this time in history, given all the things that are happening around the world and in our own spiritual lives and the lack of spiritual depth that people are finding and yearning for, they're really yearning for it, that we need to be bringing more people in. I mean, because the more time you spend with this, you see just how rich and wonderful it is. So if there's anyone on the fence out there that you know of who may enjoy being part of a new family, who can give them depth and wisdom and love and support and compassion, and so send them my way, because I think the more the merrier for what we are trying to accomplish in this world. And it's not a negation of others. It's really about let's maximize and capitalize on the gifts and the wisdom that we have been given in our tradition, and let the world see that. And we haven't been great at being able to spread that message far and wide in the way that, of course, the Christians have done an excellent job of that. But there's nothing to say we shouldn't be doing more of that, because I think people really need and want what we have to offer. Okay, Abby. Go ahead, Abby.
Okay, I looked a little closer to those last 2 lines, and I think it's such an incredible short story, but it has so much in it because just the choice of words. They said a certain venerable elder met him and said, "He who lends to the Shabbat." Well, I look up lends, 3rd person, means grant to someone the use of something on the understanding that it shall be returned. Mm-hmm. So, he, like the Gentile, has this bunch of money now. And I don't think it's just about Shabbat, which is wonderful and all of that, but just like you said, giving back and being charitable just with your time, with, maybe not even money, but he does have money now. But it's sort of, when with the word lends, it's the understanding that it will be returned. So I thought that was quite interesting. I really like it.
Yes, that's a great point. And a lot, for example, we're supposed to imagine that our bodies are on loan from God, right? It's not just lending in that sense. This is another key, I think, word to connect us to a greater Jewish value of, and this is why we have the laws of not tattooing your body or potentially piercing or doing things that just change your physical being, because it's not technically ours. Right, this is on loan from us to us from God, and that basically everything is on loan. That we are not. It goes back to this whole mentality we're supposed to have, that we are not the center of the world and we are not God. There's something bigger at work here, and we have a role to play, but there is something much bigger than us, and that can be sometimes comforting and sometimes not. But I think that's what that brings up for me, Abby, is this idea of lending. You're right, is about giving it back. That also this idea that when, just as he received that money, we receive knowledge and gifts and wonderful things from other people. We have a responsibility to give those things back. Maybe if we're not even giving them back, not just to the person who gave those to us and those feelings of comfort and love, but we have a responsibility to share those and continue to offer those same loving values or important positive values with other people, to pass it along. That it's not supposed to, like that man, held in our headdress or held close to our bodies, not to be shared with the world. That if we're not sharing it with the world, we are not doing our job. So really, I want you to think about, what are the gifts? What is your pearl? And how are you giving it to the world? And are there ways in which you can do that even more than what you're doing right now? And what are the things that stand in the way? What is the wind and the water and the fish that seems to be guiding you away and astray from being able to really take that pearl and give it to the world? Because we will be repaid tenfold by all kinds of things when we can figure out ways of giving our gifts away, where we can honor the gifts that we have within us and offer them to the rest of the world. So thank you all very much. As always, I love your thoughts and your comments, and thank you for sharing them. Thank you for those on Facebook who shared as well. I'm sorry I can't engage with you in the same way that I can with the people on Zoom, so feel free next time to join in Zoom if you want to. And really appreciate all the comments, and I hope you have a wonderful Shabbat this weekend. So early Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to being with you next week and for weeks to come. So thank you, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.